She had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the most important person in the room. That was the first thing I noticed about her. The second thing I noticed, and I didn't say this out loud, not to anyone, not even to my wife Barbara, was that the smile never quite reached her eyes. My daughter Nora had been dating Liam for about 8 months when she brought him home for Thanksgiving. He seemed fine. Steady job, decent manners, shook my hand with a firm grip. I liked him well enough. But Nora had been with Liam for almost 3 years before she ended things, and what came after that, who came after that, was something I was completely unprepared for. His name was Spencer Holt. Nora met him at a gallery opening downtown, the kind of event she went to with her coworkers on a Friday evening when the week felt too long. She told me he walked up and started talking about one of the paintings on the wall, and she said he knew exactly what to say. Not too much, not trying too hard. She was 31, he was 38. He worked in commercial real estate, or so he told her. He had an apartment in the West Loop, a nice car, and the kind of easy confidence that's either genuine or rehearsed so many times it becomes indistinguishable from the real thing. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as an auditor for a mid-size accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio before I retired. My whole career was built on one skill: looking at numbers and knowing when something didn't add up. I never thought I'd need to apply that skill to my own daughter's life. But here I am telling you this story because I did. Barbara met Spencer before I did. She called me after dinner one evening and said, "Earl, I think Nora found someone." She sounded pleased. I was glad to hear it. Nora had been quieter than usual in the months after Liam, spending more weekends at home with us than out with friends. We worried about her the way parents worry. Quietly, in the kitchen after she'd gone to bed, keeping our voices low so she wouldn't hear. The first time I met Spencer was at a dinner at Nora's apartment. She'd made lasagna and bought good wine, the kind she wouldn't normally spend money on. She wanted everything to go well. I could see it in the way she kept smoothing the tablecloth that didn't need smoothing. Spencer arrived with flowers for Barbara and a bottle of scotch for me. Not just any bottle. He'd apparently asked Nora what kind I liked and gone out of his way to find a specific label I'd mentioned once, in passing, years ago. It should have impressed me, and on the surface, it did. I shook his hand. I said thank you. I poured us each a glass. But something about it sat wrong with me later that night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling. A man who pays that much attention to what someone's father drinks, a man who puts in that particular kind of effort with the parents, isn't necessarily being warm. Sometimes that's strategy. I told myself I was being too hard on him. Nora was happy. That was what mattered. Over the next few months, Spencer became a regular presence. Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations, a long weekend at my brother-in-law's lake house in Michigan. He was always appropriate, always charming. He had a way of making people feel heard. He'd look directly at you when you spoke. He'd remember small details. He'd circle back to things you'd mentioned weeks earlier. Barbara adored him. My brother-in-law thought he was terrific. I kept my reservations to myself. I didn't have anything concrete, just a feeling. The way you get a feeling sometimes when the columns don't balance but you can't find the error yet. Nora called me one Tuesday evening in March and told me Spencer had proposed. She was crying, the good kind, and I could hear how happy she was, and I told her I was thrilled, which was partly true. I was thrilled for her happiness. The other part of me, the part that had spent 3 decades finding discrepancies in financial statements, was paying very close attention. They set a date for the following October, 14 months away. Nora had always dreamed of an autumn wedding, she told me. Leaves changing, golden light. Spencer said she should have exactly what she wanted. The budget conversation came up about 6 weeks later. Nora sat me down at my kitchen table, just the two of us. Barbara out at her book club, and slid a spreadsheet across to me. I recognized the formatting. It was professional, clean, organized by category. I later learned Spencer had made it. The total was $87,000. I looked at the number for a long moment. I'd set aside money for Nora's wedding over the years. Not a specific fund, but savings I always mentally earmarked for it. A reasonable amount. But this was not a reasonable budget for a schoolteacher in Columbus, Ohio, which is what my daughter is, and has been, for 9 years. I asked her gently who was contributing to this. She said Spencer's family would cover his side, the rehearsal dinner, the honeymoon. She and Spencer together would cover the ceremony and reception, and she was hoping that Barbara and I might be able to help with the difference between what she'd saved and what the venue and catering would cost. I asked how much that difference was. She said around $34,000. I didn't say anything right away. I looked at the spreadsheet. I looked at my daughter, who was watching me the way she used to watch me open her report card when she was 12 years old. Does Spencer have savings? I asked. He's been dealing with some things, she said. He had a business partner situation that got complicated last year. He's working through it. I nodded slowly. I said I'd talk it over with Barbara. That night I did something I'm not proud of in terms of the way it felt, but I'd do it again without hesitation. I got out my laptop and I started looking into Spencer Holt. It wasn't hard. I'm not a private investigator, but I know how to find public records. In Ohio, court filings are searchable online. I started there. I typed in his name and his approximate age, and the city he'd lived in before the West Loop apartment, which Nora had mentioned once, a suburb of Indianapolis called Carmel. The results came back and I sat very still for a long time. There were 2 civil judgments against a Spencer Allen Holt in Hamilton County, Indiana. One from 2019, one from 2021. A creditor in the first case, a former business partner in the second. Combined just over $61,000 in unsatisfied judgments, which meant, as of the last recorded update, he had never paid either of them. I kept searching. I found a dissolved LLC registered to him in Indiana, a real estate investment company. Registered in 2017, dissolved in 2022. I found a second LLC similar name, registered in Illinois in 2023. I found no property records in his name anywhere in Cook County, which is where the West Loop is. I found no record of him owning the apartment he'd described as his. I closed the laptop. I got up and poured myself 2 fingers of the scotch he'd brought me at that first dinner. I stood in my kitchen in the dark, and I thought about my daughter's face when she slid that spreadsheet across the table. I didn't tell Barbara that night. I needed to think clearly first, and when I'm upset, Barbara's concern makes it harder to think. I know that sounds like a terrible thing to say about my wife of 38 years. She would agree with me, by the way. She's told me herself she processes emotion out loud and I process it in silence, and we've made it work. I called a friend of mine the next day. His name is Roy Haddon. We went to Ohio State together. He became an attorney and has practiced civil litigation in Columbus for 30-some years. I told him what I'd found and what I suspected. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Earl, none of that proves he's targeting your daughter specifically. But the pattern you're describing, the dissolved LLC, the unsatisfied judgments, the new entity, the engagement to someone whose parents clearly have assets, that's a pattern I've seen before." He told me I had 2 choices. I could confront Spencer directly with what I'd found, or I could wait and gather more. He advised the second option. "If he's doing what you think he's doing," Roy said, "give him enough rope." I waited. 2 months passed. I watched Spencer carefully without letting on. At Sunday dinners, I'd listened to how he talked about his work. He was always vague in a very specific way, confident enough that you didn't want to appear rude by asking follow-up questions, but never concrete enough to be verified. He mentioned clients, he mentioned deals, he never mentioned addresses, amounts, timelines. I also watched how he managed Nora, not in a controlling way, not in any way she would have identified as a red flag. He managed her expectations. When she'd mention the wedding planning, he'd redirect the conversation slightly, change the subject smoothly, bring it back to how beautiful it was going to be, without ever discussing the specifics of his financial contribution. She was handling the vendors. She was making the deposits. In July, 3 months before the wedding, my daughter called me sounding stressed in a way she was trying to hide. She said the venue had requested the second installment on the deposit, and she was a little short. She asked if Barbara and I could move up the timeline on what we'd planned to give her. I asked how short. She said Spencer had run into a delay on a commission and it would clear in a few weeks, but the venue needed the money now or they'd release the date. Could we cover $11,000 and Spencer would pay us back within the month? I felt something go cold in my chest. I told her I'd handle it. I transferred the money. I also, that same day, called Roy and told him what had happened. He said, "Earl, how much have you put in so far?" I added it up, including the initial amount I'd given Nora for the caterer deposit and the florist, plus this new transfer. The number was $48,500, all given to my daughter in good faith, earmarked for a wedding. But the picture I was building was that Spencer's contributions had been effectively zero. Roy told me to document everything, every transfer, every amount, every conversation I could remember. He also told me, and this was the part that sat hardest, that I needed to prepare for the possibility that I was wrong about Spencer, but also for the very real possibility that I was right, and that if I was right, the conversation I'd need to have with my daughter was going to be the hardest of my life. The rehearsal dinner was on a Friday evening in early October. Nora had booked a private room at a restaurant called Hartwell's on the north side, a place she'd loved since a celebration dinner there after she got her teaching certification. I remember thinking she'd chosen that place on purpose, because it was hers before Spencer, a place that belonged to her own history. Barbara wore the blue dress she'd bought for the occasion, and she looked beautiful, and I told her so. I put on my good suit and I drove us there, and I smiled at people, and I shook hands and I hugged my daughter and told her she looked radiant, which she did. Spencer's family had come in from out of state. His mother, Darlene, was warm and easy to talk to. His older brother, Keith, was quieter, kept mostly to his phone. His father had passed away several years earlier, Nora had told me. I watched Darlene during dinner when Spencer wasn't looking at her. She seemed genuine. She also seemed, and I couldn't quite name it at the time, slightly worried. Not about anything visible, just a low-grade tension she was carrying. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to use the restroom. I was walking back through the corridor when I felt a hand on my arm. I turned. It was Nora. She wasn't smiling. She stepped close to me, keeping her voice low so no one nearby could hear. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something." I waited. "Spencer and I had an argument this afternoon." She paused, pressed her lips together. "He told me his commission isn't coming through. The one he said would cover the money he owes you." Another pause. "And I started asking questions, and he got really defensive, and She stopped, looked at me. "Dad, I found something on his laptop while he was in the shower this morning." My heart was going very fast, but I kept my face still. "He left his email open," she said. "I wasn't snooping. It was right there. And Dad, there's a woman in Indianapolis. They've been messaging since January. And some of what they were talking about, the things he said to her, it's the same. The same things he says to me. The same." It was like reading a script. She was holding herself very carefully, the way she does when she's close to crying and doesn't want to cry. "He's done this before," she said. "I think he's done this before." I put my arm around her and I held her for a moment right there in that corridor outside the restrooms, with the sound of dinner conversation floating from the private room. "I know," I said quietly. She pulled back and looked at me. "What?" "I've known for a while. I've been waiting to be sure before I said anything." I looked at my daughter's face. "I'm sorry I waited. I thought I was protecting you from something that might not be real. I should have come to you sooner." We stood there for a moment. She asked me what I'd found, and I told her. The judgments, the dissolved LLC, the property records that didn't exist, the money. She listened to all of it without interrupting. "The $48,000, she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," she exhaled. A long, slow breath. Then she said, "What do I do?" "That's up to you," I told her. "But you have time, and you have options, and you are not alone in this." She went quiet for a moment. Then she straightened up. "There's a thing Nora does when she makes a decision. She lifts her chin just slightly, the way her mother does. She did it then. "I need to talk to him tonight," she said. "Before tomorrow. I'm not standing at an altar and making a promise to someone I don't know." I walked back into that room with my daughter, and I sat through the rest of the dinner. I ate my meal. I smiled at people. I congratulated Spencer on his upcoming wedding with a steady voice, and I watched his face while I said it, and he showed me nothing, which told me everything I needed to know about how well he'd practiced. After the dinner, while the guests were gathering coats and saying their goodbyes, Nora asked Spencer to step outside with her. I watched them through the window at the front of the restaurant. I couldn't hear them. Spencer's back was to me. Nora was facing me, though she couldn't see me watching. I watched her face. She was calm. She was steady. Whatever she was saying, she had made up her mind. He turned once and I could see his face. The ease was gone. In its place was something harder and less patient, something that had been behind the warmth all along. They were outside for about 12 minutes. Then Nora came back inside alone. She walked straight to Barbara and said something I couldn't hear. Barbara put her hand over her mouth. Then she looked for me and I came over and the three of us stood together near the coat rack, while the last of the other guests filtered out. Spencer came back inside long enough to collect his jacket. He did not look at me. He did not say goodnight. The wedding did not happen the next day. There were calls to make and vendors to notify, and the kind of quiet, exhausting aftermath that follows when a life gets rearranged overnight. Nora stayed with us for 2 weeks. She slept in her old room and ate breakfast at our kitchen table, and cried when she needed to cry, and was fine when she was fine. And we let her be both without making either one into something larger than it was. Roy helped me file a civil claim against Spencer for the money he'd induced Nora to solicit on his behalf. It took several months and was not without frustration. Spencer's attorney tried initially to argue that the transfers were gifts. Roy was very good at demonstrating, through a paper trail I had documented carefully, that each transfer had been made under specific representations Spencer had made about his own financial contributions, representations that were provably false. The case settled out of court. The amount recovered wasn't everything, but it was enough to matter. I looked up that woman in Indianapolis, the one in Spencer's emails. I debated it for a long time. I don't know her. I had no obligation to her. But I found her name through the email thread Nora had screenshot before she closed the laptop. And I found her on social media. And I sent her a message with the public court records I'd found on Spencer and my contact information. And I told her she could call me if she wanted to talk. She called me 2 days later. She'd been dating him for 9 months. She cried on the phone. I let her talk. I gave her Roy's number. I don't know what I expected from any of this. I didn't go looking for a villain. I was just a retired accountant who noticed that something didn't add up and who made himself go looking for the error instead of rounding it down and moving on. Nora is doing well. She went back to her classroom that November and her students made her a card, apparently unprompted, that said, "Welcome back, Miss Nora," in 32 different colors of crayon. She keeps it in her kitchen. I've seen it every time I visit. She asked me once, a few months after everything, whether I felt bad about any of it, whether I felt bad about doing the investigating, about not saying something sooner, about the way it all unfolded. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I feel bad, I told her, that you had to find out the hard way that someone you trusted wasn't who he said he was. That's the only thing I feel bad about. She nodded. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she said, "You know what I keep thinking about? That dinner at my apartment. The scotch he brought you. How much I wanted you to like him." I told her I remembered. "I think I knew," she said, "not what he was doing. But I knew something. I just didn't know how to say it." I told her that's how it usually works. We know more than we let ourselves believe. The hard part isn't finding the truth. The hard part is being willing to look at it once you have. She's dating someone new now, a history teacher at her school named Philip. He came to Christmas dinner this past year and forgot to bring anything, and apologized 3 times for it. I liked him immediately. Some things, you just know.